afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacaster Addendum with me, your host, Imperial Dane, Master of Deep Thoughts. Today's topic is something I've been wanting to talk about for some time, but that is basically the devaluation of frontal armor, specifically, well, to a larger degree, German armor, I think, and, well, how I propose fixing it, because as it stands right now, I think a bunch of the issues, of course, particularly with the Panther just not being very good, even the King Tiger being not very good after it got nerfed, is basically boils down to their frontal armor is just increasingly rendered useless because outlet penetration just be going up to just, ensure they can always penetrate, which of course begs the question, why even have frontal armor in the first place and you have actual armor values if it's just going to be always penetrated? And apparently again it's because it feels bad, and obviously feels bad is a really terrible metric for anything. It can sort of indicate, where there might be an issue, but just, going, well, it feels bad, thusly it shouldn't feel bad at all, rather sort of results in the situation that just screws over the other side. It's the ones actually trying to use the tanks, because, like, the German tanks have been balanced and designed around, the fact they're supposed to be really tough, but they're not tough any longer, meaning a lot of them, besides the Panzer IV and Stug, which are designed about not being that tough, are pretty much an extent largely useless. And of course, on the other end of the spectrum, there's the problem if the frontal armor is just too good. You're just going to see no damage done to the tanks at all, which of course feels incredibly unsatisfying. It can feel frustrating as you just do everything there, and the shot after shot after shot just bounces off. And of course, there should be incentives towards flanking and all that. I think that sort of creates a situation where it's you got basically two results. Either something happens or nothing at all happens. And on top of that, you already get to hit the target. So in this case, what the issue basically boils down to is, as in several other cases sort of point out this issue, it's basically variance. Like you got two results and they're both quite extreme. There's no middle ground, and that basically means either the guy, who penetrates feels happy, or the guy who, gets, not penetrated feels happy. And that, basically means armor engagements can end up feeling highly unsatisfactory for either player, which basically means ultimately it's always going to feel highly unsatisfactory as things currently stand. It's also going to be a hell to balance, because again, like, if you then balance them around, again, having the frontal armor theoretically being used but isn't, then what are they supposed to be good at? Because they're not doing that, to offset it. So there definitely, I think, needs to be something else happening there in terms of armor. I think frontal armor needs to be made valuable again, but it needs to happen in such a manner it does, feel like a complete, coin flip in terms of, results. But at the same time, of course, also should still feel, useful for the player who's supposed to have the big, tough tank. So how do you do that? The thing is, company who's won already essentially had that. That was deflection. That was basically armor deflection. Then, deflection damage specifically. Shot fired, didn't penetrate, it would do less damage, but it would still do some damage. And we got deflection damage for anti-tank rifles, which I actually think is a weird choice, because they just high rate of fire weapons. That just means they're just going to still do a ton of damage, no matter if they penetrate or not. That's not really what the issue is. The issue is, with the tanks will shoot much slower, and then either nothing happens or something happens. Again, it just leads to these, coin flip situations where it just feels like, RNG, like it's nothing, you can't control it. And that, again, is not particularly fun. It's not particularly interesting. And of course, it also creates other sorts of issues in terms of balance. So, how do we sort of fix it? And again, I think deflection is basically the answer. We apply deflection damage to the different types of guns. Medium tank, maybe 30 to 40 damage. Sort of lighter tank destroys anti-tank guns, also 30 to 40 damage. Heavier stuff, around 60 damage. And the heavy tanks maybe do like 80 damage, because you're only going to see one of them, and they're generally going to shoot slowly. So, generally having them do more deflection damage is not a bad idea. That way, a heavy tank going up against a heavy tank just it's going to work. It's also going to feel more satisfaction, even if it fails to penetrate. It's still going to have a bit of a smash. You can also do that with heavier tank destroyers like the Jackson, the Issue-5, and such. There, again, they might not penetrate, but they'll still do some damage. But at the same time, it's still going to feel like for the guy who's getting shot at that his armor is still, somewhat functional. Plus, it reflects actual, stuff in tank warfare, which is, spoiling damage. Basically, once a tank, gets hit, bits of the armor on the inside will, fly off and hit the crew. So in that regard, it will also be, slightly historical. Also, well, if the Italian tanks, there'd be rivets going off. That was quite unpleasant. That's a fun side note there. I believe our autocarriers lost a tooth over that one. So, I think basically by adding deflection damage, again, we can sort of solve the whole issue again about, it's either going to feel really unsatisfactory for either player. Again, in this case, Like, if it penetrates, it's going to do full damage. If it doesn't, it's only going to do little damage. It's still going to make your tanks all feel a lot tougher. But then, then also increase or decrease the armor and penetration and the stuff there. Again, we sort of that way make the front armor more valuable. We can actually allow ourselves to do that because, again, instead of just feeling always bad when it doesn't penetrate, you actually still get some damage in. That way, again, it's less of a coin flip. It doesn't, necessarily feel as random in a sense because, again, the variance between the two results is less extreme. It's less, no damage, 160 damage, for example. It'll be like 40 damage, 160 damage. Obviously, 40 damage is not ideal, but you obviously got to make concessions to the players in question. Otherwise, again, what's the point of having Frontal Armour in the Blighted players if, again, it does nothing? Again, that's the magical question. So, again, I think 40 is, sort of reasonable, again, for the baseline, and to tank guns, medium tanks, and the sort of reasonable thing. And again, for like heavier stuff, we can again just increase the damage a bit. And then again, it also gives us an additional knob, to turn to actually balancing things. Do we increase the penetration? Do we decrease the, deflection damage? Or do we increase the armament? That way, there's also, more ability to actually, sort of balance the different tanks and vehicles much better if you actually, add deflection damage in to the tanks this way. So I really think that's probably what should be looked at, to be honest, more than anything. Not so much, just increasing and decreasing penetration all the time. In this case, they're obviously going to have to do it afterwards, since right now the problem is, again, like a lot of the German Frontal Armour, for example, is just utterly, pointless. Again, there's a reason why most Wehrmacht players now go for Panzer IVs and Stugs, because if the armor doesn't do anything, you're just going to go for the stuff that has the most damage, and that's a Stug and a Panzer IV. Obviously, again, you'd have to rebalance a lot of the stuff, like Stug would need less penetration, more armor though, and stuff like that, but I think that will just lead to a more satisfactory system where, again, like it feels, again, for the Wehrmacht players, the Oberkommando players, even for the Allied with the heavier stuff, like the IS-2, Pershing, Churchill tanks, like, it feels like the tanks, that way can resist more damage, they feel, tougher, and again, there's more sense to it, but at the same time, it doesn't completely feel like, complete hopeless uphill fight for the Allies. There's still be incentives towards, flanking and always, getting the right stuff, because ultimately you want to do full damage, but you're not quite as punished by, not quite having, always getting the shot, penetrating through. That way, it also doesn't feel like, less in a conflict on top of you and having to actually hit the target and then penetrate. So it's just, less two extreme conflicts, just one extreme conflict and hit or not hit, which again, I think most people are fine with. And then on top of that, it's less like, well, do I do 160 damage or do I do 40 damage, depending on the tank, or, 160, do I then do 60 damage deflection, or even 80. So I think by doing that, we can sort of get, more satisfactory armor system that, again, can, accommodate more players, can accommodate both sides, because, again, the Germans and all the heavy tanks can get to frontal armor that feels like frontal armor that's worth a damn, and again, it doesn't quite feel as, again, this sort of same uphill fight against. You still have a chance, the situation, for example, the tank gets away with this level of health, you have a better chance of actually finishing off, meaning you just can't, just get away with stupid stuff that's like these, just, oh, this tank just suddenly began bouncing every shot. No, that's not going to happen at all. Like, if it bounces every shot, it's still going to die, but at the same time, it's going to bounce more shots, meaning you have a better chance of doing something offensive with it, but also getting out of there if you do it correctly. So I think, again, we can sort of just avoid the sort of heavier coin flip elements, again, the high variance, sort of result into something, I think, more steady and balanced, and, again, more interesting and fun for everybody. So that was sort of being my suggestion here, my big hope, that with a patch, if they go around to doing that one, again, add deflection damage, increase the armor damage, or decrease the penetration, and a series of things. Particularly, I think, like the anti-tank guns and stuff like the Stugen Nation 6, then you stand to have lower penetration. While again, the stuff like high deflection damage, stuff like the Jackson, the Firefly, maybe a bit the Panther, Tigers, IS-2s, King Tigers, and so on. That way, again, just creating this, sort of, again, more roles differentiation further. But also, again, just making so when the Wehrmacht player or the Oberkommando player invests all those resources in the Panther, it feels less like a waste of resources, because guess what? A 270 manpower into a tank gun just, tore through most of its health in like a few shots, because heavens forbid, actually shots bounce, because then little Timmy feels bad, because, the armor worked. So instead, again, we assume, alright, armor hit, and again, this time around, several shots fired, they don't penetrate, but at least damage happens. We can actually see the health bar going down the Panther, thus it doesn't feel quite as bad. again, it sort of feels like, a bit more fair, because again, ultimately people see and they react with their eyes. Again, like if they don't see anything happening, they're going to really, this isn't right. Whereas again, they can sort of see even just a bit happening, they're probably going to feel, less sad and upset about it. So that's sort of my thought there. I hope you agree with these thoughts, or have your own thoughts. Can we modify this or something more satisfactory? But overall, I currently think just that Frontal, in particular German Frontal, has been devalued so much, and I do think something needs to happen on that matter, because otherwise I think it's just going to be really unsatisfactory until Communist 3 happens. Of course, this system should also be brought over in Communist 3 or whatever they do with it. So if you like this, hopefully agree with this, if you have your own thoughts, feel free to find them off in the comments. This is Imperial Dane signing off, and see you all another time for another video. And of course, if you like to do consider donating or pledging on Patreon. Links in the video description. Cheers, everybody.